Welcome back to America Talks Live. We want to talk about your privacy, specifically your data privacy when you're online. A data privacy activist has now filed complaints against major internet companies, Google, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, major technology companies, arguing that the companies acted illegally by forcing users to accept terms of service or lose access. That activist, Max Schrems, says it violates people's rights under the General Data Protection Regulation to choose freely whether or not to allow companies to use their data. And that's where we want to bring in our next guest, Richard Torrenzano. Richard is the CEO of the Torrenzano Group and a data privacy expert. Richard is also the author of Digital, and Richard, I've got the Digital Assassination. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, welcome. Thank you. It's a very sunny day here in New York today.
Great. Love to hear it. My hometown, New York City, grew up there. So let's talk a little bit about this. Can you just give me, for the audience, a brief explanation of this lawsuit? Most people believe that internet providers, technology companies, app providers like WhatsApp are private entities, and your choice as an American is to accept their terms and conditions, their terms of service, or simply don't use the service they provide. This lawsuit appears to be arguing something a little bit different than that. So can you explain what the lawsuit's about and what the flaw would be in the theory that if you don't accept their T&C, their terms and conditions, you should just go elsewhere?
Well, something happened on Friday, which was very important, and a new regulation, a data privacy regulation, went into effect in the 27 or 29 EU countries. And what happened was basically that anyone who does business in Europe, whether they're based in Europe or based in the United States or based in Asia or based in South America, has to comply now with this Data Privacy Act. Europe has really taken a giant leap forward, much ahead of the United States and most other countries. So you've got to comply with this, and you have to give people the opportunity to opt out or to erase their data, which then you cannot use in analytics.
Okay, so just to explain to the audience, that rule applies to the provider, not to the end user. So the provider entity, whether it be Google, Facebook, WhatsApp, no matter where they sit in the world, if they want to continue to operate in Europe, they have to follow these new rules and regulations.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, you may recall, there was another opt-out rule by the EU, which really involved Google mostly and other kind of content providers like Google. And that is, if you don't like certain postings on Google, you could have them removed. Now, that is not true in the United States, that is not true elsewhere, but it is now true in Europe. So Europe is becoming the regulator, the global regulator for technology companies. I think they're doing this for a couple of reasons. First, Europeans are much more private than we are as Americans. We're much more transparent. Secondly, all these companies that are being attacked are American companies, giant American technology companies. And I think there's some prejudice against that success. And most importantly, I think that they have been successful globally, not just in the United States or not just in Europe. So there's a lot of backlash against this. We've seen just in the United States some of the backlash in the last few months. What happened with Facebook and the data analytics coming out of Europe. A lot of people want their privacy. They have the ability to opt out of most of the major platforms in the United States, but they don't take advantage of that.
Okay, so where is this lawsuit, Max Schrems' lawsuit, where is that lawsuit actually being filed?
It's being filed somewhere in the EU. My guess is probably Brussels, where the EU sits.
Okay, and now, assuming he prevails, assuming he's successful, what does that mean for Google, for Facebook, for WhatsApp, for these American companies? What are they going to have to do differently in the EU, in these European nations?
Well, up until this point, most companies have had about 18 months to prepare for this. Facebook said the other day that they had 1,000 people on this for 18 months preparing for it. The issue is, as any new major regulation, you just do not know how it's going to evolve or what the court is going to say about these regulations. So that's really unknown, but there is enormous risk and liability with this new regulation for many of these companies. In addition to that, you're going to have other lawsuits, other class action suits that come out. and you're going to have to comply in ways perhaps you haven't thought about up until this point. So it's a good thing for privacy for individuals. It's a very bad thing for the giant American tech companies or any corporation doing business in Europe who is not following the rules. There was a number that came out just yesterday that it's taking Europe about 200 billion euros to comply across all 29 countries with this new regulation. And there are some estimates by some consulting firms that it's taking about $40 billion for US companies alone to comply with this new regulation.
To comply with, for the European operations.
This is very substantive. That is correct.
Okay.
And this is very substantive.
Now, let me ask you this, Richard. I have a little bit of experience in this world. I was in the tech space as it pertained to law enforcement. As a former law enforcement guy, I used a lot of data. Big data here in the United States has tremendous, you know this better than most, has tremendous amounts of data on every American. They also have very powerful lobbies in the various states, in every state, and in Washington, D.C. So even if this guy over in Europe, Max Schrems, is successful, do you think we'll ever see anything this, I'll even call it draconian, in terms of regulating the service providers? Do you think we'll ever see anything like this implemented here in the United States? We're talking about the General Data Protection Regulation, or what they're calling GDPR for short, in the EU. What's the likelihood, what are the chances we'd ever see anything like this in the US?
I think you will see something like it. I think that, first of all, Europe now has become the global regulator for technology, and that's not a good thing. But I do think that the backlash we've seen in the United States, the Facebook testimony, the Zuckerberg testimony, and some of the other chatter that's going on coming out of the Hill, we're going to see some sort of regulation coming out of this for privacy. What has happened is that technology has advanced enormously in the last 2 or 3 years and will probably go even further in the next couple of years. But the technology has advanced far faster than the communications with their customers, with the platform users. If there was good communication between platform users, Facebook, Twitter, Google, other things, and these technology companies, you probably wouldn't have seen the testimony that you saw just a few weeks ago. So I do think there's something that's going to come. I don't know what form it's going to take. I think a good national discussion, debate on this subject is a healthy thing. I think it's good for all Americans, and I think it's good for all American companies.
Now, before I let you go, I wanted to switch gears and talk about something a little bit different here. ABC obviously canceled the hit show Roseanne. Show was doing incredibly well as the result of a tweet. Roseanne obviously sent out a very controversial tweet about former Obama advisor Valerie Jarrett. The tweet said, if the Muslim Brotherhood and the Planet of the Apes had a baby, it would equal Valerie Jarrett. Many people found it offensive. The president of ABC Entertainment called the tweet abhorrent and not consistent with the network's values. Under new regulations, if they were to be implemented in the United States, regulations that are as draconian as Europe's here, and we have about 45 seconds, would a site like Twitter ultimately be liable for leaving content of that nature on their site if they didn't take the step of delete the tweet? And in about 30, 45 seconds, what should Roseanne Barr do to rectify her reputation or repair her reputation online?
Well, first of all, we don't know, because we don't know what laws would be in place and what those requirements would be, to the first part of your question. I think what Roseanne did was she had the top hit show in the United States and shot herself in the head. And overnight did a disgusting thing where we all want to stamp out racism in this country. I think ABC was right, swift, and just to do what they did. It's probably going to cost ABC in excess of $100 million. But it was the important thing to do. Had that show gone on, it would clearly have created problems for them in the second season with advertisers and protests and others. So I think they did very much what Starbucks did a few weeks ago when they had the problem in their Philadelphia store. I think Roseanne should basically buy a house in the country right now and say,
take a little break from social media, right? Richard Torrenzano, author of Digital Assassination, a data privacy expert. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, be with you.